Hi, it's Dr. Betsy Greenleaf, and we're back with another episode of Body, Mind, Spirit. I'm very excited today. We'll be going to be talking with Diana Patton, and she has I can't even begin to start with Diana. She has been doing so much work on social justice and overcoming childhood trauma. And I mean, I can't even, I'm sure I'm not even doing it justice, all the list of things that you do, but I'm very excited. We're going to be talking with Diana today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Betsy. I really appreciate the opportunity being here today and just all the work that you do. You need to be glorified and lifted up, especially in light of Women's History Month. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And so, what I wanted to ask you, first of all, how
Mhm.
did you get into your line of work?
It's been a lifelong journey for me, starting off with understanding as I looked back on my childhood, just all of the trauma that I endured. And as the sixth child of seven, and I grew up with an abusive father in interracial marriage back in my parents were interracial in the late 70s and early 80s. And that in and of itself brought on a lot of issues. And as I grew older, I knew that I wanted to be an individual who advocated for people who needed help. And the people that needed help were my five older sisters and my one younger brother. So justice and helping people overcome challenges and getting past difficulties has always been something that I've strived for. It got me to college. It took me to law school to become an attorney. And after having kids, and I don't know what it is, it's right after getting married and having kids, it just struck me, I have so much work to do on myself. And that set me on a journey of healing and overcoming the difficulties that I endured, that I wanted to pay that forward. And I wanted to really help other people so that they can get into a position of helping other people. So that's what kind of got, in a nutshell, just a real snapshot. That's how it kind of all started for me.
And I think it's hard because in our society today, like being a victim gets kind of glorified and it becomes like a social identity. Like,
Mm.
I'm a victim of this, I'm a victim of that. And especially for children growing up in households that you're challenging or having these adverse childhood experiences, which we were talking about earlier, that there's this test the CDC did, and as a physician we're always doing training in like cultural competence and inclusiveness, and I had never heard about this test
Right.
until I read it on your website.
Right. It's the adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as ACE score, where you can go in and take a test. And it's meant to be able to judge the areas of trauma that you endured that could have altering effects on you as you grow older. And this study was done with the Center for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente. And it has recently, within the last 15 years, become a little bit more mainstream. And you'll hear it in the area of trauma informed care, and to be able to give people a glimpse of what that impact has upon you. There have been several authors of books like Dr. Nadine Burke, um, and of course, we've had others, The Body Keeps Score. These are books that, if you go on, Dr. Nadine Burke has a podcast. Actually, excuse me, she has a TEDx talk where she talks about adverse childhood experiences and the effect that it has on people. And so I dug into that, and it really gave me an understanding of why I might respond the way that I do and give me the tips on how to be able to overcome these traumatic experiences.
And that's what, going back to, like, I feel like so many of us, identify in some sort of victim category, and that can be very deleterious on our overall mental health and even our physical health. So, where do we even start to try to get beyond that and not be like, I'm the victim, like, and be stuck in that spot?
Well, I personally believe that an individual's adversities and difficulties that they've endured can be their greatest strength if they're willing to take the time to investigate and learn more about themselves. There's a ton of body of evidence talking about even emotional intelligence and how we can dig deep into understanding ourselves and the triggers sometimes that we have, compiled over the years based upon the experiences that we have. And so the first step that everyone really needs to begin to commit to is saying, I am going to take the time to know myself. And that means that you are going to start to establish a daily practice where you are going to start digging deep into understanding how you respond to people, what it is that you do when individuals tend to say things to you and you might go off on the handle and you don't even understand why you're doing that. And so I believe a great place to start for a lot of individuals is to take the emotional intelligence test. There's a book by Travis Bradbury and Jen Graves on emotional intelligence. And that is a good place to kind of begin to understand a little bit more about yourself. And that when you take that test, you'll be given a result that kind of gives you some tips that you can begin to explore. And it'll give you an idea of how you can begin to overcome some of these issues. So I think that's the first step, is saying, okay, you know what? I need to take the time to do this. And when I tell people about establishing a daily practice, that means getting up at the same time every single day and starting to do a form of meditation, starting to do some form of relaxation activities that allows your mind to be able to open up and to get to know a little bit more about what it is that's coming in to yourself. There's another book called What Do You Say When You Talk to Yourself? And that allows you to be able to see what kinds of words that you might be feeding yourself, to understand, oh my gosh, I've been playing a certain narrative in my mind for a long period of time and you're not even aware of it. So there are, Dr. Betsy, there are so many different books that have helped me along the way, that have begun to kind of give me a self-practice. And that's where I say establishing a daily practice to get you to start to kind of pinpoint some of the areas that you need to focus on. That's just like one little sliver and one place to start for individuals to begin to know that. And some people might need help. They might need a coach, they might need a therapist, and they might need a counselor to help them start. But do start. And I think that's the very first step everyone needs to take.
Now, I'm going to open a can of worms with a topic that makes everybody very uncomfortable, is racism.
Sure.
And I'm trying to figure out now, as a human, as a physician, as a mother, how to get beyond all this. Because, I know when people see me, they're going to see that I'm very pale skinned. I can tell you, from the moment I have ever had to fill out a form in my life, I have refused to check off the check white or Caucasian, because I always felt very uncomfortable defining myself by the color of my skin. Mm-hmm. So here I was thinking I was doing the right thing for all these years and years and years. And now I'm getting attacked because anything I say or do, I'm being told, well, because of the color of my skin, I have white privilege. Mm-hmm. But then, for how many years people of darker skin have been treated badly because of their color of their skin. And we know this. We have the history. We have the disparities in healthcare. There's so many areas. How do we as a nation kind of get beyond the color of people's skin and look at the person and the human, and how do we make this better? And I know that's not a simple question, but what are your opinions on this? Because you do a lot with social justice.
Yeah, the first place to start for anyone is to recognize that we all are different. And that's such a beautiful thing. We come in different hues, we have different cultural backgrounds, and we have this beautiful tapestry by which we all can live by. The thing is that in this country, that not everybody comes to certain places, organizations, schools, work, wherever. We all don't come to those spaces in the same manner. That there have been some issues that have happened. Specifically, let's talk about America, where we just aren't all treated equally, right? Yeah. We don't have the same type of abilities that a lot of other people have, and some people do. And we all have a certain amount of privilege. How do we start? We have to be willing to enter into courageous dialogue. And we also have to be willing to come into these spaces in a way that allows for everyone to show up as whole as they are, as broken as they are, to be able to have that dialogue. The reason why we've seen protests happening is because there's been a lack of either listening, and there's been a lack of people being able to speak. And so we need to have spaces at our schools, in our organizations, to begin to have that dialogue. Otherwise, people stay in their separate corners. And I have an acronym that helps with it because I'm very passionate in the work that I do. And so my acronym for passion happens to be, when we're entering into these dialogues, we have to pause. With the P stands for pause, to assess. The A stands for assess, to assess the situation, get some space. Sometimes we need space, and then speak. Because when we rush into dialogue, when we rush into challenging conversations, we're not listening to people. And we need to pause, because we're going to be going into what I call some of these bias situations. When we pause, assess, get some space, and speak, then we're better able to have insight. The I stands for insight, gain insight into other people, and we become more open to what they might be struggling with. And then we gain knowledge. The K is silent. We gain knowledge, and then that's how we begin to work together. This is not an easy fix, but this is something that takes time, and it takes a strategic willingness to be able to do that. That's a very broad answer to deal with a very, a big issue, but there's some steps that we can take there. And that's kind of how I started.
I love that. I love that acronym, that passion acronym, because it really is so important. Because I mean, this past year, between us all dealing with coronavirus, and then the racial issues, and then the stress from an election, there's been so much stuff that's been going on in the United States this year that really, I think people just kind of got to their tipping point.
Yeah, a lot of people, it's a very, very stressful time. And the reason why we needed to get to this point. A lot of people, this has been my life's work. I was born into this chaos, right? I was born into difference, having this white father and a Black mom. And now, Dr. Betsy, having a white husband, I just keep it going. I get to consistently be able to look through different lenses that a lot of people don't have to look through, right? And I get to see a lot of different angles of this thing we call life. And when you don't have to enter into different spaces, it's really hard for you to be able to see what other people are dealing with, right? And so what I loved was brought about with this 2020 was that we were all at home, and we all needed to be able to, we took time to be able to see those different spaces. And that, I believe, set us off to be able to understand people a little bit more.
Great. I can't wait to talk to you some more after our commercial break. Awesome. 80% of women will develop a pelvic health condition at some point in their lives. There is relief. There is hope. The Pelvic Floor Store, your resource for personal health. And we're back with Diana Patton. And I wanted to bring up, we were talking about it actually at the break, and going back to, I agree with you. We kind of needed all this stuff to come to a head because it was all kind of bubbling underneath for everybody. And the fact that this year has happened and we've had so much of these racial issues over the last year, it really opens up the conversation. And now it's really like, what, we need to deal with this. We need to face it. And I was talking to you at the break that the racial conversations make me so uncomfortable because I'm so worried about saying the wrong thing and so worried about insulting people. And I've tried my whole life not to look at color, but then it's been brought to my attention that not looking at color, I'm not acknowledging the issues that other people are going through. And it's very uncomfortable and a tough topic to navigate. Mm-hmm. And I agree, the more we talk about, the more we can kind of get over it and get on with healing, which is really what this is all about, is us all coming to a point where we can heal mentally, physically, spiritually.
Well, Dr. Betsy, I believe the more we all, like I said, when we're dealing with issues of abuse and dealing with issues of trauma, we have to like recognize the problem or recognize the issue. And we have to educate ourselves. The biggest problem I see with racial issues is America. People in America have not been educated on the history of systemic racism in this country. What textbooks and what have you, most people my age, born in 1968, I did not go in high school. There was no one teaching me about systemic racism in this country. And
Yes.
so when it has boiled up, people who are on the other end of certain privileges tend to feel guilty. They tend to feel shame filled. They tend to feel awful because they don't know and they don't understand why people might be upset and they don't understand the history. So the first thing I tell a lot of people to do is we need to be able to educate ourselves. And if you lived in 2020 and you watched the news and you were paying attention, there were so many different news uh, reels and different types of podcasts, and lots of education happened on TikTok where you could educate yourself on systemic racism by reading certain books like How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram Kendi, right? That's one book that you can put on your list of books to read. Once you begin to do that, once you begin to engage with other people who aren't like you start to talk to them, you gain trust. You begin to, it may not always be easy, but then you will begin to understand and talk to them and realize you're coming from a space of positive intent. And then you can learn. That's how we begin.
When I was thinking about on my business classes, so I just got my MBA not too long ago. And when we were talking about from a business standpoint, there's this theory of heuristics where you make a judgment based on your past experience. And they use it for marketing and for business standpoints, but this is also the same theory of why we see racism is that at some point, someplace, or any ism, is that somebody had an experience with an individual, doesn't matter the color, race, sex, and they, interpreted this, experience, and now they carry that all through their lives, and they make that judgment anytime they see somebody that looks similar to what that other experience is.
Yeah.
What would your recommendations too would be to get over, like how to overcome that? Because we know not, just because you had a bad experience doesn't mean that every experience in that situation is going to be a bad experience.
Right. Yeah. There's the healing that needs to happen with your own self and to not allow that traumatic experience to drive every single thought. But it is a program that has been in your mind. And until you begin to identify it and do what I call taking a daily temperature of your heart, right? That's ridding yourself of shame, blame, guilt, and forgiveness and grace. Because and that's a process. Dr. Brene Brown talks a lot about how shame, when we hold on to shame, we are unable to have deep empathy for other people, right? Because we're so worried about containing ourselves and protecting this self-preservation, which has self-preservation is a good thing when you're trying to enter into caring for yourself and healing. But when you do not do that, shame runs your life, guilt runs your life, and therefore you aren't able to heal. When that enters into the racial area as well, there are some hurts and harms that have been done to us racially in this country. So we do have to forgive, right? We do have to offer grace, but then healing begins. But recognizing the issue, getting to the point that people are willing to talk about it, and then coming to solutions and opportunities to come up with ways in which we can change is even a better place.
I think like we've been talking, a lot of it starts with working on your own or inner kind of like soul and where you're at on yourself.
Yeah.
How can we take that now out and bigger into the world? Like what kind of steps can we do in any business and in any profession to make a bigger impact.
Yes. I feel if you are working in a school that you are committed to the employees, your teachers, your students, and making certain that they have pathways to heal and having conversations and courageous conversations at the school, making certain that your school has curriculums, that they are paying attention to the areas of systemic racism and how they can educate people about that. In organizations, it's much of the same, that we're making certain that you have circles of conversation and courageous dialogue, inclusion, diversity, and equity and anti-racism types of policies and practices within your organizations. As individuals, we need to be committed to our own self-learning. And then we also need to be volunteering, and in organizations, schools, and people need to be allying with organizations who are in groups, oppressed and marginalized groups, where we can ally with them to help them get to a space of equity. That's where we are allowing them to be able to come into certain spaces and get the help that they need to be able to get the opportunities that should have been afforded to them before, if not for that marginalized, oppressed position. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. And you know what? It's so frustrating because it's like it's 2021. It's like, why haven't we been able to overcome this by now? It's so frustrating. I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. And there's nothing that we can do about the past. We could always just keep taking steps forward. But in some ways, sometimes it gets so frustrating.
I think it's kind of like, a sore that doesn't heal, right? We have not taken the Band-Aid off and allow that sore to breathe. And it's an acronym. It's kind of a, not acronym, but it kind of is associated with the issues that we had last year. So many issues with breath, so many issues with the lack of breathing and getting the oxygen necessary to be able to exhale. And so I'm a big advocate of breathing, and I work it into my work on self-healing. I work it into the work of allowing people to do the healing within the organizations. And so that's what happens when you don't allow something to heal. It just continues to get worse. So once we're willing to acknowledge these issues and to be able to talk about them and to be able to hear from one another, that's how the healing begins.
And I know, and we need to be respectful of people because everybody has a story. And I love, you have something on your website that is like my favorite thing in the world is always saying that your mess is your message.
Yes, your mess is your message. And until you get to understand how your mess can be the thriving guide for others, because there's everyone has a story, and only you can tell it the way that you can tell it. And everyone has certain talents and gifts that only you have. That's the reason why we're born in this generation. And so when we're willing to go through that healing process, imagine the amount of people that you can impact simply by understanding the worth in your story and sharing it freely with other people.
And I think that is really important because I think so many times people want to hide and push down their mess and like try to cover it up. But not only does it help heal them, but somebody else has a story that's very similar to yours, and by you sharing it, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping others.
Absolutely. I just was telling you, the Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, Oprah interview talked absolutely about that and the freedom that Meghan Markle had. And now look at the impact that she's going to be having with her foundation. Some things you might want to talk about in a future episode, but there's just so many beautiful things that have come out of the healing and the continued healing that Meghan's going through, and how many people are going to be impacted by her story, like my story in writing my book, Inspiration in My Shoes, and you, Dr. Betsy, and all the work that you're doing with bringing guests on here to talk about their stories. It's a beautiful, beautiful revelation that people can have.
Was it scary to write your book?
Oh my gosh, yes. I don't want to tell everybody. Of course, I wasn't sitting there like, oh, everybody, look at all my mess. Look at all my mess. This is a process. This is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. This takes time. But again, I needed a coach. I had a writing coach. Her name is Amanda Filippelli. I highly recommend her. But she helped me because she has a counseling background. she helped me continue the journey of writing what needed to be said and also uncovering and unearthing some things I just really was, didn't want to deal with. That's why I talk about taking a daily temperature of your heart.
I was thinking about it because I just wrote a chapter in a book called You Were Made to Be Unstoppable, and
Mhm.
you had to tell a story about something, like you had to tell your mess.
Yes.
And I did one on my experience with sexism in the medical field, and it was terrifying to put it out there. And
Mhm.
now I want to do it in a bigger book, but it's scary to tell
Yeah.
you. But I know it's going to just help so many more people. So
And I want to just caution folks that if you haven't begun the healing process with your mess, I think that it takes time to come to that space of healing, and our pain can help other people. But if that wound is still seeping and it's still pretty, got a lot of bacteria in it, there might be some time you need to take that time to heal before we start going out trying to help other people, right? So it's a fine line, and not only for you to answer, but that's something that I always make certain that, because there was a time where I just wasn't ready to do all of that work. But now I know that my mess is my message, because I've taken that time to heal, and I'm continuing to heal. That never ever stops. It's an everyday process.
this is great. And you do also a lot of work, not only, well, you've done work with schools in the past, but now more so with corporations and women's, and you have a
Yes.
mastermind. Yeah, tell us a little bit about the other work that you do.
So similar to the schools, I've been doing work in organizations, just helping them with their cultures of kindness and compassion and empathy and diversity and inclusion, similar to what I was doing in schools. But also, I have what's called the Pivot and Rise Mastermind for professional women, where I just help them overcome their challenges and adversities so that they can be empowered to use their voice and to use it to advocate for themselves, for others, and for the causes they believe in. Because I just feel that a life worth living is for us to really get to know how God designed us, and how, we are able to heal through him, and to be able to utilize all of that healing that we've received and give it to other people. That's a life well lived, to live a life of service and healing and love. That's how Christ has taught us to live.
That is, where can people find more information about you?
So you can go to risewithdiana.com. And to learn more specifically about the Pivot and Rise Mastermind, which we're going to be doing a new cohort soon called riseadvocates.com. People can also follow me on social media, on Instagram or Facebook at Diana Patton. So hopefully folks will connect with me, and I look forward to, if they direct message me or they sign up for my newsletter, then we can stay in touch.
That is great. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk about this with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all your amazing work.
Oh my goodness. And I just want to remind our listeners and our watchers that if you can find more this show and other shows at wytv7.org. While you're there, if you feel moved to donate, there is an option to donate. And just knowing that the money that you donate not only helps with our programs and wonderful programs like this, but also with the community, with scholarships. And you can find out any information that you need to at wytv7.org about all the different programs that they're hosting. And once again, I want to thank Diana Patton for being with us today.
Thank you so much. This is awesome. Love it.